Welcome, church. It is good to be here with you today, talking about some things that are important to me. And my hope is that as we've gone through this series, In the Mix, that you have felt like you are a part of something bigger than just what happens in your own family, bigger than what happens with just the kids you know. I've been so blessed hearing messages on discipline, technology, and priorities personally. And my prayer is that you have been blessed in the same way. And today, we are talking about milestones. And as we look at this message of milestones, it's appropriate that we remember what we've talked about the last couple weeks, because when we think about what milestones are, it is a time for us to remember what has happened to us in the past so that we can move forward in living for God in the future. Milestones, they celebrate and remember where we've been so it can guide a path for the way we go forward. That word remember is so important. I think about remembering, and I think a little bit about when you go to the store, you need to remember, don't you? When you remember to put on deodorant, it saves you a lot of hurt throughout the day. When you remember your anniversary, you don't have to face the consequences of forgetting. When you remember to pay your bills, your lights stay on. And this word remember is used throughout the Old Testament. And as we see this word, we see God reminding his people, remember what I've done for you. Remember that when times are hard. Remember that you make a difference going forward. And we may have no greater contribution to the generation that follows than to remember and pass on the ways that we've seen God at work. We remember, and a few quotes come to mind for me. Soccer star Mia Hamm shared this. She said, "Celebrate what you've accomplished, but raise the bar a little higher each time you succeed." When we celebrate what we've accomplished and raise the bar, this helps the people coming after us succeed more. Or Nelson Mandela said it like this. He said, "Remember to celebrate milestones as you prepare for the road ahead." Milestones are so important. And as a church family, we've set several different milestones that I just want to share with you real quick. These are things we celebrate as a church and as a family ministry. The first one that we celebrate is the milestone of birth through child dedication. Now you might be saying, big deal, birth, I mean, that happens and there's nothing that we as a church do it. But there is something that we celebrate as a church. What we celebrate is making sure that families have a chance to dedicate that child to the Lord. And in child dedication, what we do is we say, as far as it concerns me, I am going to make sure that that kid knows about Jesus. The second milestone we celebrate is baptism. Now, at a lot of churches, they celebrate child dedication and baptism together, but for us, it is separate because the decision that we celebrate at baptism is a chance for a kid to say, I want to make Jesus my own. I want to make Jesus different than just the faith that I was brought up in. When I celebrate baptism, this is a milestone here at our church. The third milestone that we celebrate is the milestone of upgrade. Now, upgrade celebrates the time into kindergarten, into middle school, into high school. And for us, this is really important because as the next generation is always changing, it is important to celebrate when in each stage of life they choose Jesus and to live for him. We celebrate that as a church to tell them that that's important. Speaking of huge transitional milestones, the fourth one we celebrate is the milestone of graduation. If you have gone from the high school age to adulthood, which I'm assuming most of you adults who are watching this have, when you've gone from that phase, you know the challenges that are personally on your faith to live for Jesus in everything you do. And when we celebrate graduation as a church, we say, you need to know that we care about you and we want you to live for God in the next step of your life. The last milestone we celebrate as a church is commitment to purity. Now, this is new for us to celebrate this one. In fact, we haven't even been able to put this into action yet, but this is something that we say we want the people who are representing Jesus to commit to purity in everything that they do. All of these are in seasons of transition, and they help celebrate moments in the lives of our kids that impact more than just themselves. All of these moments impact the culture that they live in. And when we as a church embody these milestones together, we live out our value, stand together. We help the next generation know that they are not alone. We help their families who are raising them know that they are not alone in raising their kid and celebrating milestones. Think of it this way. If Christian families failed to continue to have kids, we would have a problem. Religions like the Latter-day Saints and Islam, they celebrate having large families because they know what the family unit can do in the advancement of their gospel, right? The only problem is they're living for a lie. They're worshiping Allah and they're worshiping Joseph Smith, and this isn't what they were created to worship. This isn't what they were created to live for. So when we as a church celebrate when families decide to dedicate their kids to the Lord, this is a big deal. If the next generation doesn't make decisions for Jesus, we have a problem. So as a result, we celebrate baptism as a milestone. If no one graduates, we have a problem. Now, you might be thinking that's silliness, but let me explain to you what happens. In a country that I love, Cambodia, from 1974 to 1979, there was a catastrophe that happened. There was a genocide. This genocide sought to take out all educated people in their country. And in fact, in just those 5 years, they wiped out 1/4 of the population of Cambodia. And in those moments, they sought to take out the educated so they could brainwash the migrant workers in the field, brainwash everybody else. And what happened after they had relief and the genocide ended and the country was beginning to stabilize again? They were left with a country of leaders who didn't know how to do the jobs that they needed them to do. There were judges that had come from the field trying to make educated decisions on how to decide outcomes of court, and they didn't have the education to do that. No law degree to help them in that. And in fact, the people defending them were lawyers who also didn't have law degrees. You see, what happened in those days is you just got to step up and be whatever job you wanted to. You wanted to be a doctor? No problem. No education needed. The position is vacant. And as you can imagine, this really messed up a country. So we celebrate graduation as a way to say, we care about that. We care about the gospel being pushed forward in a culture that is growing and understanding everything. What can you do to get more involved in celebrating these with our church? That's a question I get from a lot of people. And let me just share it like this. If you are a family, sign up and celebrate the milestone events in your family. Know that it's a big deal. Make sure you jump in. Don't miss out on them. If you are a family of a kid that isn't celebrating a milestone, join in with the families in our church and encouraging them and guiding them and helping them take the next step in their faith journey. Celebrate the party with them. If you're in neither of those categories, you're like, I'm not a parent and I don't have my own family, you still have a big role. Remember, in the mix, everybody is essential. Share an encouraging note to a graduate. Give some words of advice to a parent in the way that you see it to help their kids live more and more for Jesus every day. Maybe you need to make a dedication to the next generation and say, I'm going to serve them in program week in and week out. Did you realize that you are here today because someone paved the path for you to hear about Jesus? It's a crazy thought to think everybody watching this arrived at this very moment because someone paved the path for it to be easy for you to hear about Jesus. And for us as a church, we have to do this for the next generation. Milestones are about investing in what is important today so that the people who come after you will do the same when you're dead. What do you want your legacy to be when you're dead? In this conversation about milestones, I think a lot about collections. I have a lot of collections. I collect books, sports memorabilia, machetes from every country that I've been to. I'd rather not get into that one if it's okay. I think about Coke bottles I collect, stickers, bobbleheads. I have a lot of collections. And one of the things a good collection can do is similar to what a milestone can do. Collections are reminders of where we've been that help guide us going forward. You might hear that and go, that's ridiculousness. Your Coke collection doesn't help guide you going forward. But I want to share with you a little box that I have. As we look at this box, this is a box of collections. And so I'm going to open it and just walk through this with you. Inside this box, we have a number of things. We have a photo. Man, the memories that we see when we look at a photo, am I right? You see that and remember the dynamic and relationships. It is so good. This patch had such a good life. On the shoulder of a park ranger, as we see this patch, there are so many memories that are attached to this. So many memories of times caring for creation. See this little box? This box has no memories with it. Yep, no memories. Oh yeah, tassels. How many of you guys see a graduation tassel and you remember all the times that it took, all the moments? It can immediately take you back when you hold one of these things, right? I look at this pen, honor student. How cool, huh? Honor student. I want to thank my wife for giving that to me today, because that certainly wasn't my tassel. Or you see moments, right? You can go through a box like this if you're like me. You remember the days of being in the Navy, boot camp, years served, and all the tough times where we committed to our country, right? There are so many memories, and we can go on and on and on through this box. But what is cool about a box of memories is we see this, and it has the ability to take us back to a day where we remembered what we were living for. What's interesting about that specific box is none of those memories are mine. You might be thinking, I didn't know you were in the military, Patrick. Whoa, I can't believe you graduated. You used to be a park ranger? What's going on here? None of those memories were mine. This was just a random box for sale. And these memories in the box, they are without purpose. They can't even contribute to what the next generation wants to do when it comes to sharing a legacy. As you read and look at those memories, they didn't even do its job to the next generation. In fact, family and friends discarded those memories. And the box tells me one of two stories. One, it tells me the story of someone who failed to pass on their legacy to the next generation. Or more optimistically, that box tells the story of someone who didn't just live for their accomplishments, but they lived for something more. So when it came to their stuff, it didn't even really matter if they kept it or not. One of the reasons I'm so excited that we're talking about celebrating milestones is because we as a church, when we do this together, we get to set the path for the way that the next generation will live. We get to help decide what the next generation will live for in the way that we celebrate things. And today we're looking at the story of Joshua in chapters 3 and 4. And I'm excited to be sharing it. But before we jump in, can we talk just a little bit about Joshua? Give a little bit of a character study to you about Joshua and who he was. Number one, Joshua was carrying on the legacy that was passed on to him from Moses. Joshua, he was a great military leader. Do we have any of those watching today? Military leader who, honestly, what I love about him is his job in the military wasn't the most important thing that he was living for. We see in the Bible Joshua forego what would be smart military strategy because he wants to obey and follow and trust in God. And I'm curious, does your organization ever come in conflict with trusting God? Do you ever come to the moment where you can have the decision to push ahead and do something that your company, that your job wants you to do, but you know it isn't right when it comes to being obedient and trusting God? I ask this question because I'm in ministry and I have also felt that tension. I imagine you, time and time again, have this choice regularly in your work. Should I honor God or should I honor my job? You see, the best kind of employees honor God. It makes them better employees. And we see this in Joshua time and time again. Back to Joshua a little bit. Joshua, he was one of the 12 spies sent into the land of Canaan to find out if it was okay for God's people. And they sent 12 spies, and there's a song in my head that I'll never get out about that story. 2 of them came back. Only 2 of them believed that it was safe for God's people to go in. And here's what Joshua said coming back. He said, "We've got nothing to fear because we have God on our side." They went into a land of giants that would seem very dangerous, but he knew that there's nothing to fear when you have God by your side. Joshua went in and battled in Jericho. Maybe you know this story. He battled in Jericho with his army, and instead of going to war, what he did is he marched around the city, and their fortified walls came down because Joshua knew that obedience to God and trusting him in everything was more important than military strategy. Every time he gave credit to God and depended only on the strength that he had that comes through God. And so today, as we jump into this passage, my prayer is that it is impactful in your life in the same way that it has touched my heart. And so let's get into our text here today. Joshua chapter 3, verses 7 and 8 from the NIV says this. It says, "And the Lord said to Joshua, 'Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all of Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river.'" Now, these are interesting instructions we see coming from God to Joshua. God says, "I will make you a great leader in the eyes of the people." I can imagine Joshua sitting back going, "Yep, thank you. I'll be obedient. I'll do whatever I have because I'm not depending on my own strengths." But I would have heard this plan that God had for Joshua and probably thought, "You are trying to make me seem crazy to your people, right? You want us to go into the river? This is ridiculous. Take the ark into the Jordan River?" I imagine that Joshua would say, "Can't someone else go first and test out the Jordan and make sure this is okay? We're at flood level waters. Why would I want to go in there, let alone with the ark, our most important possession?" And my guess is, although God is making Joshua a confident leader in the eyes of his people, my guess would be that his people probably would say something similar to, "Joshua, have you ever stood in a river? Do you know how dangerous it is in a river? And you're going to send the ark into there?" But we see that Joshua, he didn't ask any of these questions. He just did what he was always known for. He was obedient and he trusted God in everything. And so today, isn't it comforting to know that God uses us more than our abilities when we are obedient and trust him in everything that we do? We are not measured by our accomplishments on earth. We are measured by our obedience. Here's some food for thought. Obedience to God seems crazy to the world in almost every situation, but in every situation, it is the only thing that we know for sure will work. I think about going to heaven one day. I think about being in heaven and being in my apartment, my little condo in heaven next to someone else. I wonder who will be next to me. But one thing that I'm pretty confident of, I'm pretty confident that down the road in some giant mansion, there will be a person that I'm walking the earth with here and now that I don't even know. Someone who doesn't get recognition for what they're doing here on earth, but has slowly been obedient to God in everything that he's asked. They've put their trust on a level that I don't even understand. I'm confident of that. It's cool for me to think about our abilities don't match up the way that we honor God. Our obedience to him is the thing that he remembers. So God says, "I'll make you a leader in my people's eyes. Send the priests into the river with the most important thing that we have, the ark, where my presence is, and then everyone else will pass through on dry ground." You see, as Patrick hears this message of what God told Joshua to do, I say no way. But Joshua heard this and he said, okay, obedience doesn't always require understanding, just trust. Joshua 4, 1 through 6 says this. It says, "When all the people had crossed into the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, 'Now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight.' So Joshua called together 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel. And he told them, 'Go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask, what do these stones mean?' To Joshua and the Israelites, these stones looked very similar, but they had very specific meaning. My guess is that the tribes of Israel would have been able to look at a stone and say, that's my stone. That big one, that's my tribe's stone. That one that's chipped, that is my tribe's stone. The one with the crazy swirls, that's us. We remember that day. And I think about these stones. And I just want to step back from the text a little bit. When we see stones like this, the stones that we have on stage, I want to challenge you to think of these stones as the next generation in our church. For some of you, This stone right here, it represents the kid who talks well to adults. It's easy to like them because they have easy conversation with you. But over here, there might be a stone that's the kid that you share common interest with. Or maybe over here, we have the kid from a single parent home. And so you care about this stone in a really deep way. Right here, we have the kid that was brought to church by their parents because parents know that it's important to help instill their faith. And let's just add another stone to that category right here, right? Parents, it is important for your kids to know what you care most about. Right here, there's the stone of the kid from the broken home. On this other side, we see the church kid stone, the kid who's always around, the kid who's overcommitted to worldly things. And everybody knows it but them. Here we have the intellectual challenger. Do you know anybody like this? Maybe you connect to this stone because that's exactly the same spot that you are in. Or you see right here, we have the kid who you can read the hurt on their face and they need someone to help them. Or this stone. The kid who doesn't even know the way God has gifted them and wants to use them. And last, I'll just use this stone as the stone for whatever category I left out that fills in the next generation. And as you look at these 12 stones, I want you to think of these as the people that we are responsible for being in the mix with. The people we are responsible with helping, whether they are our kid or a kid we just see on occasion. When we are all in the mix, everybody is essential. And I always imagine, just like we see a kid and can connect to them, that the Israelites would see a stone and see the same kind of thing. You see, they saw these stones and it reminded them of their tribe, God's faithfulness and direction and mission and people. It reminded them when they saw this one, how they need to pass their story on to someone else. When we see stones, it serves as a reminder. And my prayer is that today we don't just see these stones and think that's someone else's problem to deal with. We see these stones and we understand that we have a responsibility to help share to the next generation how God has been faithful in our life. This isn't just the job of a parent. You see these rocks and you remember that you're responsible, that God has called you to pass on His message actively. Get this. Do you wonder why God used stones to remind His people? It's crazy because God's people had already passed through a large body of water that He had parted. Yet, what happened when they got to the other side of the Red Sea? Running out of slavery. They were ungrateful. God's people forgot about what they had been delivered from. They said, "We need food. Are you even there, God? Can you even remember this?" And so today, as we read about God's people passing through the Jordan, we read about this memorial that they put up. A memorial for God to remind them that our work is not done. We made it through a hardship, but our work is not done. We still need to pass this on to the next generation in everything that we do. God knows that we may have no greater contribution to the generation that follows us than to remember and pass on the ways that we've seen God at work. You are only here today because someone lived out what it meant to remember and pass on the goodness of God. Chapter 4, 15 through 18. The Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, come out of the riverbed." So Joshua gave the command, and as soon as the priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's Covenant came out of the riverbed, their feet were on high ground. The water Jordan returned to overflowing its banks as before. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, "In the future, your children will ask, what do these stones mean?" Then you can tell them, "This is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and He kept it dry until all you were across, just as He did at the Red Sea. When He dried it up until we had all crossed over, He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever." As a church, will we celebrate the godly pursuits of the people who are coming after us? It's crazy to think of all the people involved in this story. We have Joshua, right? The one who was faithful and modeled godly obedience. We have the 40,000 people who passed through the Jordan River. We have the priests who went into the waters when it didn't make sense to anyone else and paved the way for people to experience and know about who God is. And then we had the 12 people who went into the river. The 12 people who didn't get it at the same level that the priest did, but they put that stone on the shoulder and said, as far as it concerns me, this legacy will be passed on to the next generation. And I just want to ask a simple question. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be a person who passed through the Jordan and forgets about what God has done? Or will you commit to remembering what God has done and passing it on to the next generation? It is so important, church. It is so important. Will we tell our story of faithfulness while encouraging the next generation to put their trust in God? The next generation has their trust in a lot of things, but God is not one of them that I would say I see a lot. This story of literal milestones is so important for us to look at because we see here as God gives a reminder of these milestones for us to remember how He was actively at work in our life. A lot of times the milestones that we celebrate in our culture remind us of our own goodness, our own accomplishments, not how God has been faithful through all of them. Yet godly milestones, they do the opposite. They take moments that are special and they give complete credit to God, and then they tell others about that. We have the responsibility to pass on what God has done to the next generation. Can I share another box with you? You know, I've been really wrestling for about a year and a half. What does it look like? What do I want to set my family up to live for? And a couple weeks ago, hearing Matt Proctor's sermon where he shared the things that his family lived for, it encouraged me, what do I got to do to help set that same kind of example for my family? So I put together a little box. I'm a collector, as you heard earlier. I just have a lot of things, a lot of stuff that I shared. And so I put this box together to serve as a reminder of things that I want to make sure our family lives for and things that we don't forget. The first thing we have in here is a Bible. Now, I didn't put this at the top of the list because it's a Bible and it has to be there. But I put this at the top of the list as a reminder. This is my wife's Bible. I put it here so that I never forget the way God has used our family above and beyond our abilities. That's what the Bible represents. I want to make sure that my family can live always remembering that same thing. Right here we have a little McDonald's toy. I know you're thinking, Patrick, you probably have a ton of toys. That's true, but this one is a special reminder for my family. You see, my youngest daughter, her name is Sadie, and someone that I'm glad she shares her name with is a lady that I knew in my childhood named Sadie Ruth Ferguson. Sadie was well off, but she lived way under her means. And the reason that she did that is because she was dedicated and committed to helping other people no matter what the cost. No volunteer sign up was needed for Sadie to take the initiative. And we have a McDonald's toy here because Sadie loved McDonald's. I know, it's a flaw in everybody, right? But you see this, and I remember how Sadie would always get the Happy Meal because she would want to give the toy to someone else who it would bring joy to. At her funeral, it was said of Sadie, it said, for someone who had no children, she had such a large family. Here I have a picture of a friend, and I don't want to zoom in necessarily on the picture of the friend, but this picture serves as a reminder of a time that God used me in something beyond anything I could have orchestrated to share His hope with. We have a songbook. This songbook simply represents for my family how we want to be people who pass on joy to others. Here we have a journal. This is something that my wife and I have taken seriously on every foreign mission trip we've been. We journal to remember what God is doing in our hearts. And as I see this journal, I remember times where our family isn't afraid to get out of our comfort zone. Right here I have a check that was shared by a member at our church when they heard a need. No one asked them for it. They just stepped up and said, we want to help the next generation. We want to help them know and experience God. And so they broke down a barrier by giving a check so that kids could hear more about who Jesus was. And my last reminders are these 2 medals. They're very simple. Right here I have a math medal, 10th place, guys. Woohoo! Can you believe they give a medal for 10th place math? It's ridiculous to me. And over here I have a tennis medal, right? This was such a big part of my life for so long. And I remember looking at this medal going, wonder what place I got. And on the back, it just says tennis. These are in this box to serve as a reminder that we're pretty insignificant if we don't depend on God. And today, as I have this box that shares what I want my family to be, I just want to share with you, what kind of step do you want to take for the next generation? What kind of reminder do you want to share? As you see these rocks, will you be the person who picks this up and puts it on their shoulder for the cause of Christ? We can celebrate a lot of things, but are we celebrating what it takes to pass on the message to the next generation? Just a few tips I want to give you. If you're here today saying, I want to set some godly milestones, but I don't want to start, write these down. If you want to set milestones that celebrate God, here's what you do. You only brag on the abilities of God, not your own abilities. Number 2, you tell the story of life change. When you tell your story of life change, you never know how God's going to use that. You never know how it's going to impact others. Number 3, you pray that God uses it to impact others when you share beyond anything you could do. And number 4, you let God do the rest. You let God take over and you don't try to fix it on your own. Church, will we be the people who use everything that we have to pass on to the next generation the things that are important, the things and the stories of God's faithfulness in our life? I pray that we can be that same person. We may have no greater contribution to the generation that follows than to remember and to pass on the ways that we have seen God at work.